Welcome back. You are here again, listening to United Public Radio, the Through a Glass Darkly Radio with Sean Patrick Hazlett. I want to just mention that the intro music that you just heard was "Mark of the Doomslayer" by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio, and I'd like to introduce a guest. It's the second time he's been here. He's very popular on both this radio show and on the Through a Glass Darkly with Sean channel on YouTube. Dr. John Brandenburg is a plasma physicist. He did his graduate work in California at Lawrence Livermore National Lab in controlled plasmas for fusion power and has worked in defense energy and space research. Dr. Brandenburg was also part of the Clementine mission to the moon, which discovered water at the moon's poles. However, the focus of Brandenburg's scientific career has been to complete the great effort of Einstein to unify the two long-range forces of nature, gravity and electromagnetism. Dr. Brandenburg, welcome back, my friend.
Oh, Sean, always a pleasure and honor to be on your show.
All right, well, this one, given that the disclosure has been so touchy and dicey in recent years or recent months, we should call it.
Well, it's finally being broached, but we're going through a difficult period.
Especially with the Arrow report by Kirkpatrick, the nothing to see here. These aren't
nothing to see here. Sort of these aren't the droids you're looking for.
And I have no idea what I mean. So before we get started, I want to ask you a quick kind of teaser question. But what we're going to cover today is kind of the dark side of disclosure, and some of the stuff that might come out might not be super, rainbows and unicorns and things like that. But the longer we delay, the uglier it could be. So, what do you make of this Arrow report? Like, what was the point of just kind of stonewalling the American public? Like, what is it? What was some faction hoping to accomplish with that?
Well, I think one faction was attempting to stop the disclosure process in its tracks. They know there are a lot of people out there who are practicing what's called fear avoidance. That's what denial is. You're in a building, the smoke alarms go off, you smell smoke, but you say, I'm going to sit at my desk here till I see fire, I see flames. And of course, and that's often not a very smart thing to do. You should get out of the building when the smoke alarms go off and you start smelling smoke. My understanding is there are powerful factions within the government and in the industry, the defense industrial complex, that want disclosure to occur because they feel like it is time that this was actually done. And then there is another faction that's kind of been in power, in control of the situation for a long time. They're also very powerful, and they're digging in for trench warfare, basically.
Oh, the other thing I did mention, I don't mean to interrupt the flow, but Miss Tessa Marie is reminding me, because I'm terrible at these things, for those who celebrate Happy Easter. when I got my setup, got my rig set up tonight, my wife's like, you're doing this again? It's Easter. I know.
I've been thinking that all day. I'm a Christian. I'm a strong person of strong religious faith. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm just an Episcopalian, but no, I am a believer. And today we think about the empty tomb.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Cosmic Jesus, um, where I actually showed that in the Bible, especially in the Greek, that Christianity is a cosmic religion, where it says, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son." That is a translation. The word for world is the English translation of the ancient Greek word cosmos, and it means exactly now what it meant then. It meant everything. And it's
Fractal. Welcome. Thank you for being a member. Sorry to interrupt, John.
that's what no, that's all right. Hey, got to answer the mail here.
Yeah, I
And
know. Just try to
but
ignore it.
anyway,
I'm not trying to distract you.
uh, so it also says that Christ's death on the cross was to reconcile everything in the cosmos, not just Earth, to Himself. So that, I mean, you can read the book, you can buy the book, Cosmic Jesus, and
And did you write it, or is it under a? I mean, you wrote it, but is it
I
under
wrote
your name, or
no,
is,
I wrote the book by
okay? It's
myself.
under Brandenburg. It's
Yeah,
under Brandenburg. It's not
I
under
was
your.
I spent my 20s, especially my early 20s, as a fundamentalist Christian because my parents had become that, and I was very loyal to them. I was their oldest child, and I respected their judgment, and they became Christian fundamentalists for being Presbyterians, and so I followed them into that experience, and I learned the Bible, and I got a deep sense of mysticism myself, for my own self, that survived, the Jim and Tammy Faye Baker things and things like this. And, I saw plenty of that in the churches I belong to at close range. So I just became an Episcopalian.
All right,
And which
back
is
to the central
Church of
topic though,
England. Yes,
because
okay,
because
back to the
I'm sure
problem at
there's
hand.
some Muslims and Jews who are just like, guys, what are you doing? What are you doing right now?
Hey, well, it's Easter. Hey, it's Easter. If it was
Yeah.
Ramadan, we talk about something else.
Well, do not comment on this. I'm just going to throw it out there, and I'm going to move on. Um, our president decided it was, he had 365 days, and he decided to make it another day today. So, I would have probably avoided putting it on Easter
That's
or
a good way to
Christmas
put it. I'm
or
not touching that
Passover.
with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah, that's all I'll say. That's all I'll say. Let's move on. Look,
Let's move
you want to
on.
have a special day, just don't put it on a high religious holiday. Just try to avoid a high religious. That's all. That's all I'm saying. Anyway,
God will get
um,
him for that. Yes.
yeah, somebody said it's Ramadan anyway. Anyway, so
It's Ramadan anyway.
so maybe
Salam alaikum.
maybe
Alaikum
on two, but anyway, okay. So you were saying that they're kind of waiting until the house is on fire before they start moving. That one
Well,
disclosure faction.
there's always a tendency to want to keep things running smoothly the way they've always run. And if you've got people who've spent their entire professional careers keeping the cover up going, then telling them suddenly, oh, the cover up should end, they think, well, I got 2 years till retirement, till full military retirement. Don't ask me to do this. And another thing is, some of the stuff, you know, was kind of cloak and dagger, what they did to
Mm-hmm.
preserve the security on this thing. And they may be worried that there's going to be some big investigations, and as typical, they may try and catch a few small fish and make examples out of them. And by the way, I am in favor of blanket amnesty for everybody in the government who's involved, who will help disclosure. As far as I was concerned, they were just following orders, and my goal is to confront the aliens, which I believe are covertly threatening our existence, not the human beings. There. And let's see, I'm getting this shadow on my face. Hold on just a second. I'm going to adjust my lighting. I look like a shadowy character.
I'll just take up the entire screen while you're doing that, so that people can't see it.
I thought I got the lighting right, and oh, I know what happened. Yeah, the sun. We had a lot of sunlight, and then suddenly it's partly cloudy, and so the cloud is. We had a lot of sunlight coming into the room, and now it's suddenly gone. There, that's better.
All right. Well, I mean, did I mention that we're on the radio, John?
Oh.
No, we're also on video. I'm just messing with you, but we are on radio too. So half the audience is like, I don't care about the light.
Now. You can maybe
see the light. You see the light.
Radio. So anyway, I'm sorry. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, you did. So what's next? Given all this, kind of given that, I don't know. Well, I don't know if you want to call it a brain fart or turd, whatever you want to call it.
I'll tell you why I am involved in this at this point. I'm a Mars guy primarily. I'm a scientist. At Mars, we have data. We have refereed journal articles. We have all of this. We have meteorites from Mars. We have all these pictures from Mars documented from NASA. I told a friend of mine who's involved in ufology, I said, and is an eminent figure is Don Ecker, former editor of MUFON, not UFO Journal.
UFO magazine. I just interviewed him, by the way. He was awesome. He's awesome.
He's a wonderful guy, and former Green Beret patriot, and no nonsense character. I said, Don, the problem with this field is there are no facts. There are only reports. I mean, I'd like to deal as a scientist with factual stuff, but let me tell you something else that's going on. I worked in Washington, D.C. for 15 years. All of the stuff that was testified to under oath by Congress, especially by Gorish, I heard all of that. I worked there between 1985 and 2002. Till just after 9/11 had happened. Then I moved to Florida to work at the Kennedy Space Center. But I heard all of this stuff. And I heard from people who I eminently trusted, professionals. Yes, there was an extraterrestrial threat whose existence was classified. And that was what the UFO cover-up was. That was the core secret of the UFO cover-up. I also, one guy put it this way, and he worked at the Pentagon with the Joint Chief of Staff on the staff. And he said, yes, there's an extraterrestrial threat whose existence is classified. So there is a UFO cover-up. He said, and that's all I can say. The rest you can figure out for yourself, he says. So
I'm getting a question. What's your highest evidence? Like, I mean, we don't need to talk about the Mars stuff because there's tons of compelling evidence there. But
well, it was reported to me by two military people that there was a UFO cover-up, and they were covering up the existence of an extraterrestrial threat. That was in the 80s, and as far as I'm concerned, none of the situation has basically changed. In intelligence, which is where I helped work as a scientific, consultant, you have to arrive. In intelligence, especially if you're dealing with an enemy who's subtle and believes in deception, what the Russians call maskarova. And of course, there's always the fog of war. reports are fragmentary. Nobody can see the whole picture. They just report what they see, sometimes not as accurately as you like, and then there's deception by the adversary, and you have to come up with what's called an estimate of the situation, an
Hmm.
estimate. And so I came to an estimate of the situation that we were in a situation of great danger, considering the implications of what it meant to have an extraterrestrial threat whose existence is classified. Then I went through 9/11, which also showed me the capacity for this government, like every other government with intelligence and defense officials, that occasionally they will fumble the ball.
Hmm.
They will have a failure of situation estimates. Pearl Harbor, for example, what the Israelis just went through when they got raided from across the border. I thought the Israelis had the best intelligence in the world, but it failed them due to deception, due to misleading. Before Pearl Harbor, the Japanese flooded the airwaves with all sorts of attack warnings, mostly centered on the Philippines and other places. The people at Pearl Harbor actually had right on the table 2 days before the attack that there was a Japanese fleet headed in their direction. And they said, well, Admiral Kimmel told his chief of intelligence, you mean the Japanese fleet could come sailing right up to us tomorrow morning and we wouldn't know it? And the guy said, yes, it's that possible, sir. That is possible, sir. And he said, well, that would mean they were going to attack us, and that would mean war between the United States and Japan. The Japanese would lose. They wouldn't do that. It would be crazy.
Hmm.
So they made an estimate of enemy intentions, an estimate of the situation that turned out to be wrong, despite
Well,
getting a war warning from Washington, D.C.
we did something that blocked off their gasoline supplies, and they
Oh, yes,
basically
we told
had
them
to attack us. Right,
they
they
told
had to
them
attack us.
we were the Persian Gulf of the 1940s. And what we'd also done, by the way, this is an amazing thing. We had figured out how to make high octane aviation gasoline in vast amounts, very cheaply, just before World War II. So that's how we could have a massive air fleet because we had gasoline up the wazoo. Now the um, so what I saw on 9/11, and by the way, in the intel shop I was working in, and people would, I would sit there at a cubicle, and somebody from the Navy intelligence or, one of these different agencies would come up to me and say, Brandenburg, we picked up this weird signal over this country when we flew over it with a satellite. Can you figure out, you know, what it might mean? Are they testing directed energy weapons or something like this? And I would give them a page of analysis on, based on what I'd worked on directed energy weapons for one thing, and I would give them my best estimate on what the likelihood was that this
Uh,
was. So I was used to that, and we had heard that there was a danger of a big terrorist attack, but we thought it was going to be in the Middle East. We thought it
oh
was
yeah,
going to.
I knew we knew something was coming about 2 weeks before it happened because when I was in
Oh,
the
we did
military.
too. We did too. Everybody talked
Well,
about
they
it
just
around the.
warned us. Yeah, they warned everybody. They put us on ThreatCon Bravo when I was in the military about 2 weeks before. But we did think it was going to be overseas, exactly like you said.
We
That's
thought
what
it
they
would be
told us.
overseas, and then it
Yeah.
flew in right under the radar, right into our laps.
Well, I actually interviewed a guest. His name's Chris Robinson. He worked for, he's a precognitive dreamer, and he worked for MI6 and MI5. And he
Yes.
told the U.S. government several years in advance that he was having these dreams about. I think he thought it was either an attack on New York or London, and then he had more and more dreams that confirmed it was New York. But I wanted to ask you two
Yeah,
quick
sure.
questions, actually. So said you worked on directed energy weapons. Uh,
Yes.
so, did Brookhaven National Lab ever do any research on directed energy weapons out there on Long Island? Do you know?
Yes, as a matter of fact.
Did that have anything to do? There's again, I talked to Don Ecker about an alleged shoot down of
It's
there's
yes,
Menachus Bay. I can't pronounce it. And then there was South Haven. I don't know if they were shoot
yep.
down or crashes, but just really quick because we got to get back on the topic of disclosure.
Sure.
But um, what are your thoughts on that? Were we operating
It looks
a
like it looks like they were shooting at craft, you whatever you want to call them, and they
mhm.
brought down two of them. One of them started a quite serious, brush fire that they took a lot of trouble to put out. One of them crashed in the bay, and that happened. And then Flight 800 blew up over the
So
same bay.
I interviewed David Morehouse, and he said there's like different conspiracy theories. I mean, sorry, there's like four different theories, right?
Yes.
The first is that there was a cabin fire and it just crashed. The second theory is there was a tomahawk, or not. There was a missile that hit it,
Well,
and
they
then the
said they
third.
saw people saw a bright object cross the sky. They couldn't describe the object.
Mm, so another theory is that they were testing. This came from David Morehouse, a tomahawk cruise missile. They were just testing if it could be rad hardened, and they had SEALs in the area to recover it and all that stuff. And as they were testing its radiation hardening, so they were going to take it down with a directed energy weapon from Brookhaven National Laboratory, and then the plane got in the way. So that's kind of theory number three. Theory number
Well,
four. Theory number four is they were trying to take down something else, and happened to miss, and it hit the
oh,
TWA flight 800.
given what I know now, my own theory, it was retaliation. The people flying the UFOs that were brought down,
Oh, so
they
that's a
didn't like.
fifth theory.
Oh, it is a theory, and I believe it was payback.
Interesting. And I mean, have you heard anything else
We're
about
we're
John?
dealing with a basically Cold War in outer space situation. I think that's my own estimate of the situation.
Interesting. Okay, so they were testing directed energy weapons at Brookhaven National
Yeah, they
Lab.
were testing a very intense proton beam, and it looks just like something from science fiction. It makes this powdery blue light beam, goes through the air, straight as an arrow, and we tested it on explosives. It set off explosives at a distance. We were going to use it for setting off IUDs from vehicles. I mean, we would
Interesting.
just have the beam would just, you know, it turns out high explosives are incredibly, this is not classified. This is open literature. High explosives are incredibly sensitive to being hit with proton beams. They will
Mhm.
detonate almost immediately, instantly.
All right, I have a random, very specific question with a sample size of one. So, someone named Clyde Cox wants to know if you met his dad or have you worked with his dad, Clyde Cox.
I,
Same name.
I, uh, I'd have to know more information. I've been 40 years working in defense and energy and space. So I, of course, worked with a lot of different people, and it's very possible I did work with him. And I worked at Sandia National Labs. I went to school at Lawrence Livermore National Lab, a nuclear weapons lab. And then I went to Sandia Labs, which is another nuclear weapons lab, and worked on directed energy weapons there for 3 years. I was roughly 6.5 years at Livermore and about 3 years at Sandia. And then I went to Washington, D.C.
Now, did you ever, do you know David Adair or Bill Tompkins?
I certainly know David Adair. I had a very pleasant conversation with him, um, about 4 months ago. Um, and I deeply respect his accomplishments. We've unfortunately not had an occasion to talk after that.
Okay. And then Bill Tompkins? No?
Bill Tompkins, that unfortunately that name does, as they say, not ring a bell. But
All right.
I've worked with a lot of different people.
All right, let's get back onto the. We'll stay in Long Island for a little bit longer, but you're familiar with the John Ford case and all that stuff.
Yes, I am.
Uh,
To about he publicized the fact that they were possibly having shoot downs from using the directed energy weapon from Brookhaven. They have an enormous accelerator there. The beam can go literally for like 100 miles in the atmosphere, and so they were. Um, Imagine Uncle Sammy, the Uncle Sammy we both know and love. And then you find out that Uncle Sammy likes to get in a tree at night with his high-powered hunting rifle and shoot at cars on the nearby freeway. And this seems completely out of character from him. But then when you finally ask him, Uncle Sam, why are you doing this?
so you can get a car.
And he says, I got my reasons.
He wants a
I
car.
don't like the people in those cars that are driving by. I'm shooting at particular cars, and I don't like the people because I don't like the people driving them. And that's all I'm going to say. And you have no need to know about anything else. So John Ford publicized the fact that he put together all of the pieces of these reports that apparently the Navy was taking pot shots at UFOs and had brought down two of them. One landed in the bay, and one landed on the land and caused a fire. And he also then reported, not surprisingly, that some people from the government came and asked him politely to shut the hell up. And apparently, John Ford
sounds like a good Irishman. He sounds like
a good Irishman. So John Ford proceeded simply to report that he had been accosted by people from the government and told to shut up.
Clancy
He
lowered
kept
the
talking,
boom.
and then
Clancy lowered
and
the
then
boom.
suddenly they found a vial. This is the version I heard. I don't know what you know, but he had a pickup truck parked on the street in front of his house, and in the back of the pickup truck, they found a cask of radium had somehow gotten there. They arrested him for terrorism because they said he was going to use that radium to threaten officials. And so they arrested him. They took him to jail. And they said he became hysterical. So they sedated him and then had him involuntarily committed. And he's still in a mental institution.
So he's still alive. He's still around?
It's my understanding. This is the second person I've heard of, by the way, who decided to tell the government to go to hell when he started reporting strange things. In Albuquerque, I worked at Sandia Labs, and every morning I would drive to work past a ornate office that had a sign called Thunder Corporation. It was run by a guy named Paul Benowitz.
Yep.
And Paul Benowitz would make very good sensors, especially for that time, for detecting infrared and ultraviolet and low intensity night vision. And he was watching UFOs hovering over a mountain out in the desert where they stored thousands of nuclear weapons. It's called Mount Manzano. And he started talking about that to people, and the government came to him, it was reported, and told him to shut the hell up about that. And he wouldn't shut up. And then some other people showed up in town. And shortly thereafter, he kind of went insane and was committed in a mental institution and died there. Now, one of the reasons I know the government was involved in his breakdown was that Bill Moore, the guy who gave us the MJ-12 papers,
mm-hmm.
He was at the Las Vegas MUFON convention, got up in front of all of us, there were about 1,000 people in this audience, and begins to explain that he was a government agent reporting on the progress of the campaign to drive Paul Benowitz to a nervous breakdown. And we're all listening to this in, kind of stunned disbelief. He's saying, oh, yes, uh, in exchange for getting the MJ-12 documents, I had to play ball with the government, and they wanted me to report on the progress of their campaign to drive Paul Benowitz to a nervous breakdown so that no one would believe anything he said. And so we all sat there and listened to this and realized, oh my God, he's just told us he was a government agent, basically helping them do their dirty work to continue the UFO cover up. And by the time we kind of started figuring that out and started people in the audience started yelling at him, he just left by the back door and disappeared. So that was Bill Moore at the Las Vegas, I believe, I can't remember what year it was, Las Vegas, 1992 or so. No, it was probably about 1989.
And this was
Las
Bill
Vegas.
Moore. This was Bill
Bill
Moore. This is
Moore
not.
of
This is not
the
Rick
MJ.
Doty. Yeah,
What?
Rick Doty was involved, but Rick
Rick
Doty's not the
Doty
one who
was
said
involved,
this.
but no, Rick Doty did not stand up and tell us this just absolutely surrealistic, bizarre story. That, oh yeah, my job was to report. They said, well, he's going to start going bonkers. Please report to us how many marbles he's losing. They'd put LSD in his toothpaste or something like that, and who knows what they were doing.
We don't
Well,
know.
and part of it also, part of it also was he said, oh, so don't pay any attention to what Paul Benowitz said, especially about the military class, the firefight at Dulce, and these other things, because that was just disinformation we gave him to help drive him insane.
It's either true or it's not.
Well, and I talked to Leonard Stringfield,
Mm-hmm.
who was quite close to people in the UFO cover-up, and and I also talked to John Lear, and in fact, so I talked to Leonard Stringfield, and he said he'd heard 3 different reports about the firefight at Dulce, this underground base supposedly shared between the U.S. government and the aliens, and that he said the only major difference between the accounts was the body count. He said the basic scenario was pretty much the same among all these stories, so he had decided that it was a true incident, and of course, being reported to him in a kind of garbled way by people who were either there and still traumatized by it, or had only heard about it first or secondhand. Then I also talked to John Lear, and he was certain his source of information was that he had flown for Air America for the CIA,
Mm-hmm.
and knew a lot of people still at the agency. And he also was good buddies with Jimmy Doolittle, who was still alive and obviously well connected with they sent Jimmy Doolittle to investigate a bunch of northern, what they call ghost rockets in Scandinavia, about the time of Roswell.
Is this the same Jimmy, like Doolittle of Doolittle's raid, or is it different?
Yes,
Doolittle?
yes, same guy.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So,
for people who don't know, this is the
here I
Doolittle
walk
raid.
into,
Like they flew
what's
into
that?
China, and for people who don't know, the Doolittle raid is when they like flew out of Burma or something like that, or
Yeah.
I can't remember where they launched it from, but they did a raid on Japanese forces on mainland China from like these remote bases, in Asia or wherever. But
By the way, after I met with John Lear, um, I came back Monday. I visited kind of on the weekends, and then on Monday, I got in my car to go to work, and I noticed this brown car following me out of the parking lot, and this guy produced this great big telephoto lens, and I thought, what is he doing with this big telephoto lens? Wouldn't it be weird if he started taking my picture? And he did. And he wanted me, the two guys driving the car, it was a brown car, and they were wearing brown windbreakers, and they wanted me to know I was being followed and photographed. They were sending me a message. So they followed me out into the streets, taking my picture. I pulled into a parking lot, and then they sped off. And so I went to work. I showed them, though. I went to work and reported it because I had a security clearance. I reported it to my security meister. And I'm sure that somebody sent out a memo. And the people at work, by the way, when I reported this, said they'd noticed a car with all these aerials on it, basically showing up whenever I showed up at work and departing whenever I departed. So they were trying to send me a message to mind my P's and Q's. And look, I got security clearances, when I first found out there was apparently a UFO cover up, I was just devastated. And I, for about 3 or 4 days, I wanted to just quit working for the government. But then I had an interesting experience. I woke up one morning and after being 3 days of just being in utter complete turmoil, and I thought things could be worse. I could be French because the French government prides itself on not following the rules. They're saying in French, that translates roughly into English as rules are for fools. We'll do whatever we need to do. And of course, the US government is not following the rules that we would normally expect if government agency will. But these people are cloak and dagger people. It's their job. They're supposed to finish their security on this thing, and they're doing it. So I became aware of the UFO cover-up. I felt devastated by it. I started going to the MUFON meetings. Before that, I'd been just a Mars guy. Mm-hmm. And yes, and one of your commentators, all great powers do that. You think the British play nice with people who won't cooperate? And in Russia, Paul Benowitz and John Ford would have simply disappeared. They would have received the Russian equivalent of concrete overshoes and be at the bottom of the Black Sea or something. I mean, the Russians, wouldn't even bother warning them to shut up. They would just, and so I became very conscious of the fact that I was living in a country that at least tried to make a pretense of having a constitutional rule of law, even if it would bend the rules. And I was also dedicated. One of your comments, the British invented deceptive tactics. I mean, we turned over spoofing the Germans into thinking we were going to invade at the Pont de Calais instead of Normandy before D-Day to the British, and they just masterfully. And the British have had excellent intelligence ever since Queen Elizabeth, because they were dealing with the Spanish.
As far back as the Trojans and beyond, right?
Oh yeah, every government. Right. Well, it's even Sun Tzu writes about you got to have good intelligence.
Deception. Yeah, all warfare is deception. Right.
All warfare is deception. Formlessness. Make yourself formless. He says the best way to not let your enemy find out your plans is don't really have a plan. be constantly changing your plan to adjust to new conditions. And so, I mean, okay, so what I discovered is our government doing what it does. And we got our training from British MI6 in basically in World War One and World War II. And, you know, so I'm a patriotic American. I realize that's why I say there should be a blanket amnesty for everybody in the U.S. government involved in this cover up, simply because I know there were a bunch of stand up cloak and dagger guys, and they were just doing their jobs. They felt, and I'm not interested in the human beings so much unless they're actually working for the aliens. Anyone who's going to cooperate in disclosure, I think, should get complete amnesty. And
What about
it's
the
not
people who've
because I
wanted
don't believe that
scientists?
people have done stuff that is really bad, but I want I want disclosure to occur. I want the truth to come out, even the ugliest parts of it to come out, so that we learn from this. And yeah, so that's, and you know, I'm interested in, I have a beef with what is reported to be this hostile alien power, the Greys. I have a beef with them. I don't have a particular beef with people working for the US government who, in most cases, are just following orders. And so that's my position. It's a practical, as a practical matter, I favor amnesty, simply because otherwise, some people are, well, anyway, the other way is we're just going to be involved in a years long trench warfare exercise. And
Yeah, I don't.
the real enemy is not on Earth, it's out there.
Yeah, I think if I'm not holding my breath for government to tell us anything. I think if we ever want to find out, we're just going to have to do it ourselves. I mean, like,
They'll do it when they've tried everything else.
I mean, it's
By the way,
likely that.
there's one thing I have to concede. One thing we must give credit to the U.S. government also and to our NATO allies for. That's this. It's a great quote from Sun Tzu. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu. I'm also a big fan of von Clausewitz, by the way. I'll explain to you the difference between von Clausewitz and Sun Tzu's theory of conflict. But Sun Tzu commented, he said, you know, I've heard of successful military operations that were clumsy, but at least they got them over quick. You know, they were clumsy but quick. He says, however, he says, I have never heard of a successful military operation that lasted a long time. We're looking at an attempt, in my own estimation, of a hostile alien power trying to covertly assert control over the Earth and colonize it with hybrids with our immune system, to, you know, so they can live on Earth. And they've been at this now 80 years, and we're still running things ourselves. I mean, you could argue, oh, we're not doing a good job. Well, and people are a little nervous and paranoid right now because they suspect there's stuff, the government, important stuff that the government is not telling them. That's what they suspect. And but you got to give the government credit that they have delayed this thing now 80 years. I mean, that's a really long siege. By the way, if you read anything about sieges of cities in the ancient times, if you couldn't get a siege to succeed, you know, batter a hole in the wall and get through there, 9 times out of 10, plague would break out in your own camp, or there'd be a coup d'etat while the king is off here with his army besieging this city, and suddenly one of his many illegitimate kids tries to seize the throne while he's out of town, and so all sorts of things can happen in 80 years, even to somebody from outer space. So,
And folks, if you're just joining us now, you're listening to Through a Glass Darkly Radio with Sean Patrick Hazlett. I'm here with Dr. John Brandenburg, and you're listening to us on United Public Radio. Right, go ahead, John.
so, and also, I love these reports that we have all these crashed vehicles. These vehicles did not crash because they have poor quality control. That Boeing was, unlike the reports that Boeing actually made all of the UFOs for the aliens under contract. No, no, they have their own contractor.
Well, I mean, let's be honest; they could barely make aircraft at this point.
Yeah, who, Boeing, or
Do you see all
the
the
aliens?
crashes and the
yeah, it's just and sadly, the guy who was in charge was the guy in charge of their quality control, who knew that they really cut the budgets for quality control and everything was going to hell. He was testifying, and they took a break in his testimony, and then they found him dead in his truck.
Yeah, he decided to go into his truck in the
shoot himself
hotel
in the middle
parking
of
lot to go shoot himself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't even pull this one off, successfully, because it looks to me like they had him murdered. If you watch the movie Michael Clayton, it's a great movie, where the head of this chemical company, they're facing this big liability lawsuit from all these farmers who got cancer from this weed killer they've been giving them, and the lawyer the lawyer suddenly has a kind of a breakdown and starts helping the plaintiffs in this case. So the chemical company just hires some hitmen to kill him. And unfortunately, then this one character, Michael Clayton, he knew a lot about the thing too. So they try and kill him, but they bungle it. They blow up his car, but he's not in it. And that typically happens,
All right, so going back to the disco, like, what's the current state of things right now? Like, is this something that's imminent? This being disclosure, are these things going to show up soon? I mean, I've heard rumors that there's some big event in 2026, 2027 that's anticipated. So what's that? Is there like a fleet that's going to show up? Is there?
I don't know. I have no idea. And when I was graduating from college, a well-known religious group in this country that I will not name because it's been a long time. This was back in '75. Predicted the day when Jesus was supposed to return, leading us all to nervously look out the windows that day, and nothing happened. So
well, I mean, that's actually a common thing that happens though. Throughout, like, every generation has it. People have apocalyptic dreams, and there's usually some sort of millennial cult or some cult that says the end of the world is coming. They drink a bunch of strychnine. Right, you have Heaven's Gate that happened in the '90s. You had the Jim Jones Gate in 1978. Right, like
I was writing a novel about a big asteroid on a collision course with Earth, and the government tries to keep it as quiet as possible until they can figure out what to do about it. And the person who guesses that the government is covering it up and that it's going to, is the leader of a doomsday cult. So he wants the world to end because he's got terminal cancer, and he's convinced the government gave him this, and the night before the big intercept operation is supposed to happen at JPL, his followers drive a truck bomb right through the front gate. of JPL to try and stop the intercept. And so, and it was funny. I had written that part of it already, and then Heaven's Gate happened because of Hail Bob. So I thought, well, I better finish this thing. I got this
Speaking of
idea.
millennial cults, do you see this whole red heifer thing in Israel right now?
I've been hearing about the red heifer for about
No, they have
15.
they have an altar and they have a bunch of red heifers that they got from Texas, and it was on CBS News like 2 weeks
What?
ago.
Well, it doesn't. The red heifers from Texas, that don't count.
Somebody thinks they do. I
I'm
don't
not.
know. It's
Hey,
just it's like a
I'm not an
millennial cult
Orthodox
thing.
Orthodox Hebrew guy, but I'm certain that the heifer's got to be born in Israel for it to matter. I have no idea. I'm sorry. There was a nice comment by Tessa. Put that
Oh yeah,
comment
yeah.
up again.
I think she. You were talking about a fictional character, Michael Clayton. That's the car bombing. The
Yeah.
person who, quote unquote, shot
Oh,
himself.
no,
That
no,
was a
no,
real.
no,
That was the
no.
real
I thought
whistleblower.
he said he shot him. No, no, I was talking. Yeah, I was talking about writing a novel with a
Right.
suicide car bombing in it to stop the asteroid intercept. And I'd already written it in a novel, and then it happened with Heaven's Gate. So I thought, well, I better finish this novel. So I did. It's called Asteroid 20-2012 Sepulveda. And
Well, 2 years ago, I started writing a novel about crash retrievals, and then about 6 months from finishing it, David Grush gets in front of Congress and testifies that we have crash retrievals.
there you go. Oh,
So I finished the book within six months and sent off my publisher. But
good. Well,
yeah,
no, that's good. I mean, I'd heard about crash retrievals for a long time, and some I'll tell you one great story I heard. This was a really neat story. You've all heard of. There's an incident in Fort Dix where they shot an alien coming onto the base. Happened in 1978, reportedly. It's a well-known case. Here's this alien, and they shot him on base. And the backstory on that was this is the backstory I heard when I was in DC. There'd been some UFO sightings in the area of Fort Dix, and they got a call from somebody. And Fort Dix is kind of out in the countryside, and it's surrounded by this fairly dense oak forest. It's a
mm-hmm.
nice rural area. And so they got a call saying, gee, there's a UFO hovering over the forest, about 3 miles from Fort Dix security fence. We thought you ought to know. So the security force, a bunch of MPs got 2 Jeeps or Humvees, whatever they were driving in those days, and heads out through the road to this location that the phone call had identified, the approximate location. And there was this clearing in the forest where it had, been a former lake or something, a little pond. And so they get there. This is the story I heard. The MPs drove up this place to this clearing,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a UFO hovering over the clearing, and there are 4 aliens on the ground, little gray, the real short gray aliens. And there was this moment of shock while the FBI, the MPs, and the aliens stared at each other, and then the uh, aliens broke and ran in 4 different directions, and the UFO took off and abandoned them. They abandoned their landing party. And, it was gone into the sky, and the aliens headed for the woods, and the FBI, not the FBI, the MPs jumped out of the trucks and were pursuing these little guys into the woods, and they couldn't catch them. They were running too fast. So they finally got back in their Jeeps and went back, went back to Fort Dix and reported all of this. So, so then 2 days later, out of the woods comes this rather bedraggled, starving looking alien up to the front gate or up to one of the security gates at Fort Dix. And the security guard looked at him, pulled out his gun, and shot him in a panic. So that's how that I mean, sounds like something humans would do, you
Yeah.
know. In other words, the big screw up happens even to the aliens, and I love that story because it also it most dramatically emphasized that many of the stories I heard involved kind of mystifying incompetence by the aliens. I mean, they said that one of the other stories was the Navy put up a big radar on like Kwajalein or someplace like this because they wanted to
Hmm.
track the warheads coming in from like Poseidon or Polaris missile tests. So they put up this big radar to do terminal tracking of the warheads, and they switch it on, and immediately on the neighboring island, UFOs start crashing. Like they finally collected 4 UFO crashes on this neighboring island that was in the path of the beam. What they'd done is built a giant bug zapper by accident. And they said they had so many alien bodies, they quit trying to preserve them or send them any place. They just burn them and bury the ashes on the site. They took all the hardware, but they said so one alien ship after another was flying into this big beam of radar and apparently burning out its computer guidance computer or something and crashing. And, so anyway, so I heard several stories like that. Meaning um, just like human beings, uh, not only is intelligence found elsewhere in the universe, but so is gross incompetence apparently. And that also explains why this thing has been going on for 80 years now. That what we identify as the gray little short gray aliens, the little short guys with the big heads. Actually, what it is their bodies are really skinny and scrawny, so their heads are only the same size as the humans. Their brains are about the same. Reportedly to me that their brains are only about the same size as the humans. It looks like they're very brainy because their bodies are so small and scrawny. And not only that, they're gray because they have copper-based blood, not hemoglobin-based blood. Instead of iron-based, it's copper-based. That's found in like octopi, tarantulas, scorpions, large um, non-vertebrates on Earth use what's called hemocyanin.
Hmm.
It's a dark blue when it's full of oxygen. So instead of these guys being pink, they look kind of blue gray. And so um, now it's you can imagine the difficulties of trying to take a creature with a completely different physiology from a human being. We're mammals, and these things may not be even true vertebrates, even though they have the same kind of basic body shape. It's a very practical body shape for an intelligent technological being. And
Hmm.
so they are, looking at this as a scientist and just piecing together the reports, it looks like they're attempting to basically achieve a hybrid like between a mouse and a praying mantis.
Right.
And you can imagine how well that works. I mean, uh, like which blood chemistry are you going to use? Hemoglobin or copper? Or are you going to have 2 separate circulation systems, one for the brain and spinal cord that's based on hemocyanin, and the rest of the body is based on hemoglobin? You have to have a quadruple heart to do that. It would just, you could just imagine. Now, on the other hand, we have a group of aliens that are widely reported that look just like us, called the Pleiadians or Lyrians. Other people call them Nordics. I don't like calling them that. I just say they're
Because
Pleiadians.
they're not apparently all white. I mean, like they're not
Oh
just
yeah,
blonde
no,
hair, blue eyed.
they're. Some people say,
Yeah.
oh, they're all blonde. No, some of them say they're brunettes. It's been, and some people who report them saying, oh, I was invited on board a spaceship by a bunch of blonde aliens, and then they do a hypnotic regression. Oh no, their hair was actually brown like mine. I just imagine them having blonde hair for some reason. So we look the way we look because we belong apparently to an interstellar kind of genspore that you could call Pleiadian. We're
Mm-hmm.
probably largely Pleiadian in heritage. We're the result of shore leave by the Pleiadians when they were young. All of the stuff of, the sons of God saw the earth girls were very pretty and decided to take, wives of them, whoever they like. And the children of these unions were great men about whom many legends were written. That's in the Bible. Then
Mm-hmm.
you extrapolate that to the Greek legends, Perseus, uh, a bunch of these other Greek heroes, Hercules. They were all offspring of supposedly the gods who were constantly coming down to earth and having affairs with earth girls, and okay, so we have apparently somebody out there who's so much like us they can have children with us easily. I mean, you could say, oh, those are hybrids. Oh, no, they're just that's they're just people, they're just human beings. Basically, they're human beings, but they're not from earth. In fact, our own genetic heritage is probably not mostly human, not mostly terrestrial. By the way, with panspermia, everybody owes their genetic material from outer space because that's where spores from outer space are what started life on Earth. And then, of course, we had this intervention late in our history by these people who looked and acted just like us. And so then the gray, what we call the grays, who look like they're kind of like hive insects,
Mm-hmm.
they apparently didn't arrive in any numbers at all until like 1942, after World War II had started. And they supposedly come from Zeta Reticuli, and that's 40 years from about the first time we had a lot of radio transmissions. So they may have picked up our radio transmissions and decided that we were a culture that was ripe for the picking. And the Pleiadians, and by the way, I do this work on Mars. There's a dead civilization on Mars. The faces of the Martians look basically human. I mean, they're humanoid at least, and allowing for artistic embellishment and erosion on the objects. They're basically human looking. And so this area of the galaxy was apparently dominated by people like us. And these little gray guys are kind of a new thing around here. That's what I think. By the way, the Earth is in the center of a void in space called the local bubble. You can look it up look it up on the web. Local bubble. We're dead center in a region that is pretty much where stars are sparse. We're surrounded by these walls of stars out about it's a sphere, or a rather kind of cylindrical region of about 100 light years across, and it's just a wall of stars around us. This region was apparently cleared out by a big supernova explosion. Then our solar system drifted into it, and we're dead center in the center of this. And by the way, since many different races are visiting here, it's easy to surmise that we are in some kind of we're in a neutral zone. We're not controlled by anyone in this area. So, and if you look at the Earth, it's very water rich, very resource rich. So we are a resource rich, strategically located planet. So I'm talking big picture here. And of course, all of this is just, we're just connecting dots here, but that's all you can do. All you can do is come up with a situation estimate. You can't come up with a, exact reality.
Thank you to Moonman for the super thanks. And I think there's an alternative theory that the Nordics Pleiadians are made by aliens, by the aliens harvested by human sperm and eggs. And then they're saying that these I like to call them non-human intelligence. I think he likes to call them aliens, are full of BS when they speak to us. So there's,
Oh,
you
you don't believe anything that somebody from outer space tells you.
including
There's no way you
people
can
that say that
verify
they're
what they're saying. And
Pleiadians, right?
yeah, I mean, but the behavior of the Pleiadian people when in the encounters has been so much more positive than the little short gray guys. They're the ones responsible for cattle mutilations and abductions and human mutilations. And you know, there have been several very friendly reports of encounters between us and the Pleiadians. They're our kindred.
Mm-hmm.
Blood is thicker than the water, even in outer space, as it turns out. They're probably the reason that the Greys haven't just tried to just take this place with one big military push. Um, one is that we have a lot of nuclear weapons. By the way, here's my analogy to how the human race should get through this period. Japan was out in the Orient. They stopped the Mongols from invading. The samurai did. They had, in fact, the samurai had to hold off two Mongol invasions. The first invasion, they learned that the swords that they had were not sufficient to go through the armor of the Mongols. Mongols had this buffalo hide armor, and that the Chinese type swords that the Japanese were using were not sufficient to get through it well. So they developed the double-handed katana because it could, and they tested it on Mongol armor they'd captured, and they ensured that that it could slice through. So when the Mongols came back 2 years later, the Japanese were ready for them, and the Mongols came back to exactly the same harbor they'd invaded the first time, and they had a 2-month battle with the Mongols had catapults on their ships, flinging iron mines with gunpowder in them at the samurai. But the samurai discipline was so strong that they just stand there on top of the earthworks waiting for the Mongols to attack. And it didn't matter if a bunch of samurai got blown up, the guys would just move forward and take their places. And finally, the Mongols tried to storm the beaches. They failed. They couldn't make any headway. And then finally the bay was just full of dead horses, human beings, and the dead human beings, and 2 months worth of dead from this epic war battle. And then the hurricane came and destroyed the Mongol fleet, and then the Japanese mopped up whatever survived, and very quickly. And so the Japanese had already defended their island vigorously against the Mongol invaders. And in the meantime, so then fast forward in about 1512, Cortez and his macho muchachos, the conquistadors, they conquered Mexico. Took them 2 years to defeat the Aztecs. And the Aztecs didn't have horses, didn't even have good steel. They didn't have steel. They barely had a little bit of bronze. But the Spanish rolled over them. The Spanish, by the way, had gone through 800 years of war with the Moors, so they were absolutely hardened warrior society. So then the Spanish went to the Pacific coast of Mexico, where there were dense forests, cut down trees, built ships, and sailed across the Pacific to the Philippines that they already knew about because of Magellan. And they landed there and proceeded to conquer the Philippines. Took them about 2 years. The pickings in the Philippines, though, were pretty slim. I mean, there wasn't a lot of gold like in Mexico, and it was basically a Stone Age culture. The Aztecs had all this good stuff, and the Philippines was, basically just Stone Age tribes. But the Spanish heard about a land full of silver and gold and beautiful women wearing silk and, fabulous cities and everything up to the north called Japan. So the Spanish loaded up their ships with conquistadors in full suits, full armor, sailed up to Japan and tried to plant the flag of the Pope and King Philip on, some of the Japanese islands. And they were met on the beach by the samurai, who had steel swords. They had horses. They had good steel armor. And they were absolutely ferocious. I mean, there's a letter between the governor of the Philippines and the king of Spain saying, boy, of all the people around here in the Far East, these Japanese really, really are fighters. He says, and to make matters worse, the evil Portuguese, which were then rivals of the Spanish, had sold the Japanese gunpowder and muskets. And the Japanese figured out how to make their own muskets, their own gunpowder, and soon every samurai army from every samurai warlord had its own battalion of musketeers. And the Spanish, sitting in their ships, their Spanish galleons, I mean, these things to the Japanese. The Japanese at the time thought the world was flat. They didn't even have compasses. They didn't. A Japanese person did not sail even out of sight of land. They were, coastal fishermen. And here's these what must have looked like alien spacecraft. These big galleons. They got cannon on them. But when the Spanish saw lines and lines of samurai on the beach flashing their swords at them in the sun, and the cavalry had arrived, the samurai cavalry, and then the musketeers had arrived, they just said, Captain Pedro said to Miguel, his first mate, he said, get the boys out of the boats. We're not landing here. And they basically concluded that Japan was too far away, was too advanced, and too damn warlike to conquer. So that's why Japan stayed sovereign. And what happened then was the Spanish tried another ploy. They tried converting a bunch of the Japanese to Catholics, figuring that then they would accept the rule of Spain and of the Pope. And when the shogun, and then the Japanese united under the shogun, and when he found out what the Spanish were trying to do, he just called everybody together and said, okay, no more of this Christianity business. You're being disloyal to Japan by becoming a Christian. So you're not going to be Christians anymore. Are there any questions? Somebody raised their hand. He was taken out of the room and killed. Are there any more questions? Because they didn't want the Spanish to conquer the place.
Right. A quick
and
question
take all
for
their
you.
stuff. What? Yeah.
Quick question for you. So, Bruno, thank you for the super thanks. So, Dr. Brandenburg, are you aware of the David Jacobs thesis on hybrids, and do you believe
Yes, I am.
infiltration takeover is a reason behind the cover-up, i.e., cloak and dagger with NHIs? In other words, have they already infested?
Well, I would. Dave Jacobs and I pretty much 100% agree on the reason they are making hybrids. They are making hybrids to colonize this planet with something with its own immune system that they won't die of athlete's foot here.
Mm-hmm.
They'll have immunity to that. They won't die of the common cold. the reports are that they've tried to keep gray aliens in captivity, and they die after they have a fairly short lifespan because they get Earth's diseases, the
Mm-hmm.
cold, flu, uh, athlete's foot. It kills them. They have no immunity to it. So the hybrids do have immunity to those common diseases, and so Dave Jacobs and I completely agree on this. I published my work in 1990 in the MUFON Journal.
Mm-hmm.
I made you aware of that, and if you posted that someplace for your listeners, I think that would be of benefit. And I about the same time, Dave Jacobs arrived at the same conclusion I did, that they were making hybrids to colonize this planet. Now, if you're dealing with a group of aliens that look like bugs and act like
Mm-hmm.
bugs, like the Greys, okay, and you say they're hybridizing, okay, reportedly those hybrids are pretty sick. They don't last long. You're they're trying very hard to make healthy, strong hybrids by combining basically mouse DNA and praying mantis DNA. Okay, so that's not working out very well. The other people who are hybrids are just Pleiadians. I mean, some of the Pleiadians here aren't even representing their government; they're on the lam. Well, I'm here because my ex-wife is her family's looking for me. Or I got creditors and I can't pay them, so I'm here on Earth hiding out. Something like that. And people said, "Oh, you can tell Pleiadians because they don't have earlobes." My father didn't have earlobes.
Mm-hmm.
I remember wondering about that when I was a kid. He just didn't have earlobes. I mean, but he was certainly an Earth person. He was quite earthy, as a matter of fact. So when people say, I say hybrid with what? If you're talking about people who are hybrid with Pleiadians or one of the or Lyrans. By the way, if you want to know what a Lyrian looks like, check out the movie by Walt Disney from 1962 called Moon Pilot.
Hmm.
And it's got this beautiful woman in there, and she befriends this astronaut. And she says uh, he's supposed to go up and orbit the moon and come back. And she says you don't have enough radiation protection on your capsule. You're going to die up there. Here's a formula for a coating we can put on your capsule to save your life. And they become quite cozy with each other, and they end up getting married and having kids. And she's Lyrian.
Hmm.
And yeah, she's just a real cutie pie. So, what did Walt Disney know about Pleiadians? Because the Lyra is a constellation, that's up in the northern uh, sky, and they say that's where the Pleiadians are actually come from. They originated in some place in Lyra, and then they fled Lyra because they got in a war with these reptoids and lost
Mm-hmm.
basically, and they moved to the Pleiadians. But the Pleiadians are now very strong, they say, and they are helping to protect us. People say, well, if you suppose we have disclosure and the aliens don't like it, well, which ones? I mean, if we have friendly aliens out there giving us technology, we have retrieved crashed alien vehicles that we can reverse engineer. And by the way, human beings are incredibly quick learners when they need to be. We can reverse engineer stuff really. Look, that one of the things that happened after the Battle of Midway was the
Mm-hmm.
Japanese tried to invade the Aleutians, and 1-0 was shot. It took a 50 caliber round in its wing tank, and it started losing all of its gas. It couldn't make it back to the carrier, so it tried to do a landing on this one island in the Aleutians, and crashed instead. They found that plane within a week.
Mm-hmm.
They took it to San Diego, re-engineered it, and that produced the Grumman Hellcat.
Oh,
They
really?
made a they made an airplane that could outturn H-0 because it had such a powerful engine. So they upgraded the Wildcat, which was the standard Navy fighter, and made the Hellcat. And the Hellcat had air superiority then over the Pacific until the very end of the war, when the Japanese came up with some new fighters. But by that time, we had a B-57 Mustang and the Corsair and all of these planes. But a crashed Zero in the Aleutians gave us everything we needed to do to reverse engineer and make a better fighter plane than the Japanese had. So there's precedence from that. So, okay, we've got friendly aliens out there who are kindred, they're blood kindred to us. We've got all this crash stuff and we're reverse engineering it. Plus, human beings historically have been rather a feisty bunch. We're both Irish, and we don't shrink from battles. And the what if you're the Greys, you're traveling here 40 light years, let's say from Zeta Reticuli. Let's say that that's where they come from. You're trying to wage a war at the end of 40-year supply lines, 40 light year supply lines, against a planet with 8 billion people on it who have the capacity to all fight to the death. It's impossible. It is impossible. What they're doing is incredibly difficult, even if there was no disclosure. Now, in fact, what's happening, Sean, and this program is part of this process, we're not having government disclosure. We're having the guerrilla war version of that. We're having exposure. Everybody knows who is interested in this matter. They know the possibility of a threat from outer space posed by these little gray aliens and their hybrids and all of their schemes. And they know we can shoot down their ships. That's what why do you think they call them crash retrievals? No, a lot of these ships were shot down by us. Some of them, Don Ecker believes a lot of them were shot down by the Pleiadians. And the Russians particularly reported fierce battles over parts of Russia, Siberia especially, between different groups of alien spacecraft towards the end of the Cold War. So based on that, and the fact that God is with us, God is with us. They can't do what they're, if there's, I don't care what the government discloses at this point. We are allowed to make if the government's not going to tell us the details, we can figure out, we have an estimate of the situation. We have the basic facts right. Okay. We're not alone in the universe. There are good and bad people out there. The good people are easy to deal with. The bad people are not. They're here trying to take over the planet because it's a valuable planet. It's got a valuable location, got valuable resources. It's just that it's got 8 billion people, human beings living on it. That's the big problem. Once all of that becomes common knowledge, it's going to be impossible for the aliens to take over here. Impossible. I don't care if we have to trade 20 jet fighters for every alien spacecraft we bring down. We can make jet fighters 100 a day. They got to send 40 light years to get more spacecraft.
I don't know if we can make 100 jet fighters a day. In World War II, we can make 100.
Oh,
yes,
yes, we can.
Nowadays,
yes, we can.
Really?
Yes. I mean, America operates its defense industry in two different modes. One is peacetime, where the goal is to make maximum amount of money per jet fighter that you build. So there's no incentive to make 100 light years, especially because the government doesn't want to buy 100 jet fighters a day. It doesn't need them. Now, if there's a war, then the government basically says we need as many jet fighters as you can make. Look at how many aircraft we produced before World War II in this country and how many we produced during World War II. There is no comparison.
And
If
to be fair, we had lots of spare capacity back then. Now
oh,
we've moved all our manufacturing capacity overseas, mainly in
well, they're
China.
going to be our out. This is going to be a global alliance.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
It's going to be a global alliance. Not even the Chinese will work with the work with the Greys.
Now, what do you make of all the psychic phenomena that is attributed to Greys in terms of
Well,
abductions
a
and things
lot of
like that?
this is people who are being abducted and terrorized and probably drugged. They don't know what reality is. They say, "Oh, the aliens walk through walls." You know, no, they walk through the door and they make you imagine they're walking through doors. It's
Hmm.
just, you know, there's what's called a rice strand curtain. It looks like a solid wall, and you walk through it, and if it, and once you have somebody under your power, especially if they're utterly terrorized and they're on drugs, you can make them imagine they saw whatever you tell them. So a lot of this stuff is just BS. We're dealing with what's called psyops. We're
Hmm.
in a zone of conflict. It's a hyperdimensional conflict. Some of it's being fought on the physical, us bringing down craft, reverse engineering the technology we capture. Those involve real battles with real bullets and missiles and ray guns, our directed energy weapons. Then there is the psychological battle where um, imagine somebody arriving at your front door with a who you've never seen before, and they say, "Oh, I own this house," and you say, "How's that? Why is that so?" And they said,
Well, it
"Well, I
turns out
have a
they're doing
deed."
that in New York. They're doing that in New York City right now.
Well, New York City is barely
Humans,
part of our
humans are
civilization.
doing it to other humans. They're like, well,
Yeah,
I've
they
been
they are.
squatting here for 30 days, so
Oh yeah, yeah. They'll show up and they'll say, "Oh, your great grandfather deeded me this place. Here's the deed, and here's his signature." And you say, "I ain't heard nothing about this, and I don't have a great grandfather." You're imagining things, and it's all psychological BS. It's I am your father, Luke. You know, it's okay. Here. Imagine somebody lands in your backyard in a spaceship. They get out. They look like you. They smell like you. They're looking at your wife uh, dreamily. It's been a long space voyage. They've been cooped up in this thing for a long time, and they say, "Yeah, I'm here to help. You'll at least invite him in for coffee."
hmm.
Somebody who lands in your backyard looks like a praying mantis or a bug or something like this and says, "I'm your daddy. Um, I created you, and I own you, and what's mine is mine, and what's yours is negotiable." And about this time, you pull out the your handgun in your waistband and say, "Get back in your spaceship, keep going." That's what you tell them.
Yeah.
One of the other basic principles of human law, by the way, is possession is 9/10 of the law. It had to be that way. Um, we own this place. We own ourselves. Nobody else owns us. Only God. And anybody who climbs out of a spaceship and says, "Oh, I own you because I seeded you genetically and stuff like that," just say, "Get back in your spaceship, keep going." I own
or
myself
or
now.
you agreed,
I'm declaring independence. There.
or your soul contract mandated it before you were born, and you agreed to this.
Oh yeah.
You
Oh,
ever you
it's
ever
just
heard that one?
incredible. I've
Yeah.
told one person, I said, this is no galaxy for the gullible. Don't believe anything these people say. And by the way, that even counts for people who look like us. We all know we all know the history of human beings versus human beings on this planet. And so yeah, don't believe anything the ETs say. I mean, if a Pleiadian, well, in fact, it's if they're Pleiadians here, everybody's getting genetically tested anyway. There's nothing that's popped up unusual. They're basically us.
What
You
about
know, if they were,
like reptilians? What about reptilians? You hear some of that in the literature.
well, they're not reported very often.
Hmm.
Um, they're supposedly the enemies of the Pleiadians. So, hey, we got no dog in this fight. That they're not the direct threat, is my understanding. It's the Greys. It's the little short gray guys.
And then I think somebody had asked this earlier, and I just didn't ask you yet. But in your kind of correspondence with people working on this, in
Oh,
the
and by the way, all I'm reporting is what I've gathered from fragmentary reports. I'm reporting
right,
to you my estimate of the situation. I don't know exactly what the absolute truth is. But let me tell you something. I'll just interrupt one thing. I went through 9/11 in Washington, D.C. And as we discussed earlier, you were in the military then,
mm-hmm.
and you heard threat warnings. We heard threat warnings in the shop where I worked 2 weeks before, but we expected the attack to be overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Then it happened, and it happened right here at 42nd Street in New York and down the street at the Pentagon. This convinced me that occasionally this government could really fumble the ball sometimes.
Sometimes.
Just like Pearl Harbor, we could get our estimate of intelligence wrong, and the colossal screw up with massive loss of life could occur because people made mistakes. They made the wrong judgment calls. They ignored warnings and focused on other warnings that they thought were more urgent, etc. So uh, I am giving, I am talking about this, and some people say, oh, he's a paranoid, he's engaging in paranoid fantasies. Well, no, I'm telling you about a situation that I heard absolutely exists, is very dangerous, and I know that my government can occasionally really fumble the ball, and I'm worried they're going to fumble the ball on this one. So it's up to the people to basically, the government's not going to disclose what it's doing. We have to expose alien activities, basically. And then it won't even matter when the government finally discloses, okay, well, we already knew that, you know? Yeah.
Huh. That's weird.
What's weird?
It says,
Oh, yeah.
is it a
There's something
coincidence?
open through a glass darkly.
Is
Well,
it
it's a line
really?
from the Bible. Yes. It's a line from the
That's
Bible.
weird. That's
It
weird.
is. Hey, we're all
Yeah, I didn't even know Dr.
the
Brandenburg when
human.
I came up with the name
Let
of
me
the
tell you
channel.
something,
Huh.
John. The human race is actually all psychic.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us have more psychic ability than others, but the whole human race. That's why H.G. Wells could write War of the Worlds back in 1900, and the aliens come down. They use directed energy weapons. They use poison gas, and they also used humans as a food source. And all of that stuff is being reported now. Is that because everybody read War of the Worlds? No. Is it because maybe H.G. Wells picked up something psychically? Yes, that's what I believe. So I'm
Okay.
sorry, but I interrupted you, but I just wanted everybody to know. Yes, I realize I'm sticking my neck out, but I'm saying what I think is my estimate of the situation based on what I heard that I considered very reliable and other fragmentary reports, and that's all you can get.
So what's this? So um, Linda Moulton Howe has often told this story about an intelligence briefing that Ronald Reagan had allegedly received about different NHI species, and
Oh
I,
yes.
I think the Greys were kind of considered kind of good, but there was something called the Trontoloids, which were like an insect-like species that were very hostile. I mean,
Oh
have you?
yeah. Well, I mean, the more different the more different from us the aliens that are reported in appearance, generally the more hostile they are to us. And on the other hand, the Pleiadians are reported to be basically friendly to us. I'm sure some of them are con men, you know, that would be the human race we know and love, right? Even if it's
Right.
not from Earth. So, yeah, my understanding is, there are three basic groups. There's basically humanoids,
Mm-hmm.
humans that are not, we're super terrestrial. We're not just confined to Earth. Okay, so we got kindred out there. We got our cousins are out there. They're looking after us. Then we got the Greys, and then we got some other, reported species that are fairly minor in the reports. I mean, the Greys are like 60% of the reports, and
Mm-hmm.
then there's the Pleiadians, and then reptoids. I think are only like 10% of what people report, and then of course there's some real buggy types, and of course they're the most hostile because they're the most different from us. They look on us as just a food source. They don't, and we look on them as a cause for us to call an exterminator.
Yeah,
I mean,
bugs.
they're bugs.
Bugs.
Yeah, and so it's a yeah. That's just my estimate of the situation based on the reports I have heard, some of which I consider very reliable, others are less reliable, but they all seem to paint. And then, of course, completely independently of the UFO thing, I have the what looks like a humanoid civilization on Mars. They didn't look like mantoids. They didn't look like tarantoids. They don't look like grays. They look like us on Mars hundreds of millions of years ago, and then somebody nuked them. And that's a completely independent line of evidence that not only we're not alone in the universe, but of the universe's brutality on occasion. We already knew that though, because we're on Earth.
Mm-hmm. So, how do you think this actually comes out? Because you kind of need an operating principle to prepare for some of this stuff, and
Oh, there'll
if there's
be
only
it'll come out. It will come out. It'll become kind of just common knowledge, and eventually it'll basically work its way. The Congress right now is being very docile. The Pentagon said basically the congressman, you have no need to know all the details. Now, who's running this country? Is it the
it's not
Pentagon?
Congress.
Yeah, the Congress is supposed, we the people are supposed to be running this country. We the people are going to expose this so it's common knowledge. And and then the chips will just have to fall where they may. I mean, um, in my cycle of novels called the Morning Star trilogy, the UFO cover up collapses. It dies a horrific, violent death in my novel. And then we have a global alliance against the Greys. And the second novel, we are basically finding gray bases on Earth and destroying them, including on the bottom of the ocean. And then we invade the moon. We finally invade the moon. We have enough reverse technology for anti-gravity, and but what's our ability to produce sheet metal and locks and kerosene ultimately is what moves the really heavy stuff up to the moon for us. And we invade the moon. Our ground forces advance. I mean, we got everybody up there. We got the NATO alliance up there. We got the Russians. We got the Chinese that are pretty useless, but we got the Japanese. And yeah, turns out the Chinese government does not want its troops to incur heavy casualties, so they won't.
The Chinese, like,
well, all of their people on the moon are only childs. Every Chinese soldier
okay.
on the moon is an only child, usually
Yeah,
of a high government official.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't want any casualties. So they're pretty
The
useless on the
princelings.
moon.
Yeah, the princelings. Yeah.
But you got the Irish up there. You got the Germans. You got the French. You got the Turks.
Oh man, I wouldn't
You
want to
got
be.
the
I wouldn't be
United
up against the
States
Turks.
Marines, and and then you've got the Japanese who fight like hell, and then you've got the Israelis up there. They have the Golani Brigade up there, and the aliens were just not prepared for this at all. Sun Tzu, according to Sun Tzu, the best way to win a war is without a shot being fired. You get somebody, you razzle dazzle the enemy, get them to all desert their tents in the middle of the night. You get somebody to open the gates of the walled city at night rather than doing a siege. It's Sun Tzu is big on razzle dazzle, psychological ploys. And by the way, the reason psychological ploys are so heavily employed by the Chinese is because they're very vulnerable to them themselves historically. And so Sun Tzu says the best way to win a war is without any shot being fired. And that's what the Greys are trying to do. They're trying to do a covert takeover based on stealth and terror. And it's going to fail. And then what's going to happen is they're going to have a real war. And they are not prepared for a real war. They don't have the resources here. They have 40 light year supply lines. And the other in the novels, the Pleiadians and this other group called the Unal start raiding the Gray supply lines, so that finally only one half, and finally only 1/3 of the supplies they're sending to the moon and reinforcements and stuff are actually getting to the moon. And they're telling their people, deliver these cargoes to the moon or don't come back. So they get halfway to the solar system, and half their convoy is gone, and they say, okay, we can't go home and we can't go to Earth. We're resigning from this war. They just take their ships and they sell the cargo to somebody, whoever is interested in it, and they become freebooters. And so the Greys just, it becomes a war of attrition, and their technology, yes, is superior to ours, but not enough. Quantity, as Joseph Stalin said, quantity has a quantity all its own. And our supply lines are 1 light second to the moon, and theirs are 40 light years from their home worlds. And they just finally, they can't do it. And especially because the other surrounding races, who hate them anyway, they consider them the scum of the galaxy. They start raiding, they even hire pirates as mercenaries to raid their, so that the surrounding powers, they can claim clean hands, So anyway, so that's what happens. And finally, the Greys send one big fleet, And by that time, the Earth has its own fleet, and they have a big fight over the far side of the moon, and the Greys lose. And then what's left of their fleet retreats and then gets picked off by all these other powers on the way out of this neutral zone, because they're in the neutral zone. They're not supposed to be here in the first place. And so it is a complete disaster for them. In fact,
For folks just joining us, you're watching
Yeah.
Through a Glass Darkly Radio with Sean Patrick Hazlett. I'm talking with
So
Dr. John
that's
Brandenburg, and you're listening on United Public Radio. All right, John.
That's all right. So anyway, and the two women actually end up on the moon as war correspondents on the moon. And I'll just tell you one scene. They go through this battle for one of these craters, and the Americans take a lot of casualties. So they're on this kind of maglev train being sent back to this base, and there's all these wounded Americans with all these horrible wounds, and the nurses are trying to keep them all alive, and the two women are carrying bedpans and bags of blood for everybody. They're helping out. They're drafted into the nursing corps, and they finally make it back to this base and they're sitting in a bar finally, and the nurses who they'd worked with on this train, this evacuation train, are sitting in the same bar and invite them over for a drink. So it's a bunch of nurses, and they're all exhausted, and this one nurse, this short blonde nurse, keeps looking at Cassandra Chen and says, if you guys would have left the UFO cover up alone, none of this would have happened. So this is all your fault. And Cassandra's friend Pamela slugs her. And they end up in a barroom brawl with these nurses, and the MPs come storming in and separate them. There's a bunch of women screaming obscenities at each other and saying, the MPs are saying, who started this? And they're both screaming at each other. So the MPs tell them, get out of here, go back to your hotel. And the two heroines, Cassandra and Pamela, are walking out of the bar, and the blonde has a nice shiner now. What's the beginning of a nice shiner? And Cassandra has her arm around her shoulder and says, Pamela, now we can say we have truly done everything. Yeah. So we win the war. We win the war because we are very organized, and we're very quick learners, and we get a lot of help.
So
by the way, and if you're prepared for a war that doesn't have a shot being fired, that's also the cheapest form of war. So suddenly, if you have to fire a lot of shots and you're not ready for that, then you get your ass kicked. And that's what happens.
So at what point do you think there would be I'm trying to think of the right word for it. Like at what level of information that humanity has would there be a turning point at which the Greys would?
I think when about 20% of the population kind of understands the basic situation, that we're in danger. The government is covering up a dangerous situation. And in fact, the government may be being threatened by the Greys not to disclose, because the Greys don't want disclosure. They want to be able to abduct people without anybody waiting for them with shotguns, and or things like that. And so, and the Congress will finally just say, you're going to tell us what's going on, or you're going to lose your jobs. In fact, in the novel I wrote, when the UFO cover-up starts to really fail because of these two women, the secret government decides that the UFO cover-up is too big to fail, and they attempt a coup d'etat. against the regular government. And they expect the aliens to show up in the sky over Washington, D.C. to give them shock and awe. And they have troops in black. They have several battalions of troops in black taking control of the Capitol. And the president declares a state of emergency and calls for the arrest of Cassandra Chen and Pamela Monroe, the two women. But it's cloudy. So the aliens are flying around in the clouds. No one can see them. And some of the special forces are firing microwave beams at them, so they're afraid to come any lower. So they finally just give up and leave, and they just abandon their human allies on Earth. Finally, there's a final scene. I love this, and I wrote this. I just laughed when I was ready. The coup has been crushed by loyal military forces, loyal to the Congress. And the White House Rose Garden is full of dead and dying troops in black. And the head of the UFO cover-up, the secret government, is trying to make an escape to his helicopter to make good his getaway. And one of the medics is trying to help the troops, and says, sir, we didn't bring enough medical supplies, for this situation. We didn't expect this level of casualties. And the head of the UFO cover-up, the secret government, points at Venus, which is the morning star on the horizon. It has just risen. He says, look, the aliens have sent a mothership to help us. It has medical supplies and reinforcements. Make contact with it with your radios. And then he gets in it. Everybody's then staring at the morning star.
At Venus, right?
They're staring at the planet Venus, which has risen every morning that week, but they don't know. And they're desperate. They're surrounded by National Guard and Marines and everything. They're being napalmed down by the Lincoln Memorial. And so the head of the UFO cover-up gets in his helicopter and races away. His helicopter gets pretty badly shot up trying to fly over the Potomac and get over the other side. They fly low over the Potomac, and then they go up over the trees, and there's an armored column on the highway, and they open up with everything at them. And so the helicopter barely makes it to the airfield that they own, so they can get on a jet plane and fly to their big hideout in Colorado. And so it's a complete fiasco.
So how many people do you
and the
think
aliens,
are involved?
by the way, the aliens completely abandon their human allies.
How many people do you think are involved in this cover-up, like realistically today?
Oh, I wouldn't. I'd say the equivalent of several army divisions worth of personnel.
That much? That large?
I think so. Yeah. This has been going on for 80 years. It's been well funded.
Like, how do they recruit and staff this group without anybody really knowing?
Oh, one of the characters in my novel, who's kind of a good-hearted rascal, and he
because for the audience that doesn't know how big an army division is, you're talking anywhere from 15 to
about 10,000
people.
men, isn't it? About 10,000.
It keeps getting smaller because they're having recruiting problems. So they keep reducing the number of. So I'm not really, but call it between 10 and 20,000.
Yeah, so I think there's a large number of people involved in this, and I'm not talking just about government people. They're also contractors at the aerospace places that are handling this, like Boeing.
Yeah,
the government now can hire people from Boeing to take care of security problems. They don't have to do it themselves. So obviously, and the people at Boeing then use them for other problems apparently. So that's the way things are. Back in the day of Carnegie Steel, they had a big strike by the steel workers, and they brought in an army of Pinkerton detectives to try and retake the steel mill, and they ended up with a pitched battle, and the Pinkerton guards were completely outnumbered, and finally were surrounded and had to surrender. And, hundreds of people got killed. And, just because working conditions in the steel plants were so dangerous and terrible, and their pay was so low. And so Dale Carnegie went on a big PR campaign. That's when he started building libraries. Good Scotsman.
You mean Andrew Carnegie? Dale Carnegie's the winning friends and influencing people guy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
guy's
not
not
that
winning friends or
Carnegie.
influencing people. That's why he had to buy a
Andrew
university.
Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie
Yeah.
built the library in my hometown, Medford, Oregon. So yeah, so but the big business has always done stuff like this, you know,
So you
and
think this is mostly a cabal of some government officials, but it's mostly quasi-government, lots of contractors
it's
and things like
kind
that.
of, yeah, quasi, gray area. It's, if you're working for a defense contractor and you're involved in this program, ump security clearances, and
Mm-hmm.
most of those people are just, you know, they think they're working for national security.
Mm-hmm.
They just say, I'm just doing my job here. Somebody brings me this crash and says, we don't know, don't ask where the pieces came from, just see if you can make it work, and then see if we can duplicate it. And that's what they do. They shouldn't be. Nobody should be mad at them. I mean, I just, yeah, I don't have a beef primarily with the human beings involved in this. You know, in fact, when the cover up first was going on in the
Mm-hmm.
50s and early 60s, I think it was probably a good thing because it allowed the human race to keep its own self regard. And then finally, we're landing on the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all these technologies, ourselves, and we're in a much different situation than when the UFO cover up started. But some policies were just grandfathered. So I don't, anyway, that's why I'm not trying to I'm not trying to gloss over. I'm very aware of some of the horrible things that have happened in the name of preserving this cover up. And I'm not trying to gloss over those. I'm just saying the real target is the aliens, the hostile aliens, not all ATs,
Mm-hmm.
just some of them. The Pleiadians, and then by the way, according to people I've talked to, the universe is believe it or not, Sean, the universe is a complicated place. It's not simple. There are apparently people who look like the Greys who are actually quite friendly out there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are also, and this is the easiest part for me, there are ones that look like humans that are utter rascals.
Mm-hmm.
They may be just renegades, they may be pirates, they may be a different culture that just happens to share our same genetic makeup. But in my novel, The Collapse of the UFO Cover Up, and you can see, by the way, if you don't want to read the whole thing, it's a long novel, but you can get a synopsis of it called the UFO Morningstar Pass, The Collapse of the UFO Cover Up, third edition on YouTube. And, in the book, the two women heroines are interviewing this one woman who was abducted by people who look just like us, and they said, well, so you were on their ship, what did they want? And the woman says, they wanted what most men want. And the two women just look at each other with big eyes and, oh my God, the rest of the universe is just as sex crazed as this place.
All
Yes.
right, John. I think we're out of time. So any final words to the audience before we end?
Yes. God is with us. We'll get through this. We have friends in outer space. We have a lot of reverse engineer stuff. We're extremely clever, and we're very brave. And we're going to get through this, and our future will look like Star Trek. So there.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Brandenburg.
Thank you
and,
so much, John, for having me on. It's a
and for
pleasure
those
and
who
honor.
celebrate, happy Easter, and have a great
Yes.
night with your families. And if you're not celebrating Easter, have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean.